Thank you for listening to the Business and Beyond podcast.
We appreciate all of our listeners. If this is your first time listening to the Business and Beyond podcast, we hope you enjoy this episode. Episode 49 of the Business and Beyond podcast is brought to you by Apogee Grafix. Ashton here along with Tony, and joining us today, we have a very special guest. He is a former US Marine, former firefighter, entrepreneur, and international best-selling author. I'd like to introduce Zachary Green. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, guys. It's so good to get a chance to speak with you.
Yep, you too. And do you, just so we can get it out, you prefer Zachary, Zach, either or?
Zachary when I'm in trouble, Zach any other time, and if I'm in really big trouble, then it's Zachary, my middle name and my last name.
There you go.
You know what's about ready to fly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Tony asked me that earlier, and I said, I'm not sure. I said, oh, crap. I emailed him just saying, hey, Zach. So I hope
Zach is perfect.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Some people are weird about their name. I joke around. I have a coworker. He actually, incidentally, is a former Marine as well, and his real name is Charles. And I kind of mess with him and call him Charles sometimes, and he doesn't like it. But yeah, some people are weird.
Charles.
Yeah. Well, Zach, before we get to talking about your book, which we have right here, and we'll have links and everything we'll go over later, give us a little bit of a background onto what sort of led to writing this book, what your experiences were, and what information you wanted to really get out to other entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so I mean, this book has really been decades in the making. As a child growing up with ADHD, bouncing around from school to school to school, feeling like I was a failure, not recognizing the talents that I actually had, it really kind of prepared me for this journey that I ultimately am on right now. And it's funny because you say ADHD is supposed to be a disability, but I actually consider it a superpower because it allows me to multitask now, and I can do 4 or 5 things at the same time. You know, ADHD is considered bad. Multitasking, great. Yeah. They're the same.
Exactly.
So, getting a chance to, as an entrepreneur, having to juggle 4 and 5 things at a time has been really beneficial. Got out of high school, joined the Marine Corps. In the Marine Corps, what I noticed was, first of all, brutally difficult. Parris Island, summertime, drill instructors, sand fleas, all the training that you had to go through. Every week, the training got more and more challenging, but yet it felt easier because the previous week was so hard. It prepared you for that next step. And what I started to realize is this constant theme that you see with warriors. It starts with adversity, really having challenges to help prepare you for what I call the crucible. Now, in my case, my first crucible of my life happened on the parade deck of Parris Island when the whole platoon turned left, I turned right. Drill instructor singled me out and just really broke me down. I fell down crying. He left me alone, told me he didn't ever think I would be a Marine. And that was my absolute abyss. So at the bottom of every crucible, and the crucible is that turning point in your life where you cannot get any further with where you are right now. It's literally at the point in time when you either crash and burn, you die, you kill yourself, or you go into a really bad place. And if you're not trained, when that crucible happens, it can be devastating. And for me, what happens is at the bottom of the crucible lies the abyss. And the abyss is where failure resides and giving up. The great philosopher Nietzsche once said, if you stare long enough into the abyss, eventually the abyss will stare back at you. And what he meant by that, what I understand that he meant by that is, if you spend too much time in toxic relationships, too much time in those very unhealthy situations, be it professional or personal, it's a lot harder to get back out of it once you've been there. But you recognize the abyss is there. You understand that it's there. You honor it, you respect it, but you don't go too close to it and get away from it. And for me, that bottom point there, my crucible, as I was crying on the parade deck at Parris Island, was when I gave up my civilian ways and I transformed to become a Marine Corps warrior. And when I left the crucible, I had to leave something behind. And for my case, it was that civilian way of thinking of giving up easy and fear. So let's fast forward to about 10 years later. I get out of the Marine Corps. It's 1999. 2 years later, September 11th happens, a day we all remember very well. For me, that day struck me so significantly because my brothers and sisters were out there taking the fight to the enemy, and I was just sitting home doing nothing. So I joined our local volunteer fire department. And as I was going through our initial training evolutions and actually got involved to a live structure fire, I got lost. Couldn't see my hand in front of my face, total complete darkness. I'm pushing my way down the hallway, assuming that there's going to be a staircase or a door at the end of the hallway, and there was nothing. It was 3 walls. And I'm like, oh shoot, I'm in a walk-in closet. I'm not in the hallway. And I panicked and finally gained control of myself. But we're talking a darkness that you can't see your hands in front of your face. You got 80 pounds of gear on. And I get outside and I start talking to my captain, and he literally starts making fun of me. He said, look, that's part of being a firefighter. You have to be comfortable in that dark, disorienting space. I'm like, no, it doesn't make sense. That's not right. And so what I wanted to do was find a way that not only myself, but all my brother and sister firefighters would never have to go through what I just went through. And I remember this glow-in-the-dark material that we used in the Marine Corps on the back of our helmets. We called them little cat eyes. The Army calls them ranger eyes. And I found a way to take that same glow-in-the-dark material, but make it glow much brighter for much longer periods of time. And I put it into different things, like a band that goes around your helmet on the fire department, on tools, on your uniform, a whole bunch of different accessories. I go into a fire a couple of weeks later after I made the prototype. Guys are literally saying, what in the world's that stuff on your helmet? That's incredible. And I'm like, hey guys, can we put the wet stuff on the red stuff and get the damn fire out and get the hell out of here? So we finally get outside. Guys are throwing $20 bills at me. And over the next 6 months, I'd get phone calls from other fire departments asking me for a couple more of them. And I'd start selling them out of the trunk of my car. Made $5,000 in 6 months. Finally, my fire chief sat me down and said, Zach, you have something that can truly revolutionize the fire service. I don't think you appreciate what a big deal this is. So I went to this big trade show, cost tens of thousands of dollars. We've got our pop-up soccer tent with the side walls held together with duct tape and zip ties, cardboard signs. Next to us are these big, $100,000 booths from these billion-dollar companies. And we had a line so long over those 3 or 4 days that the people in the other booths were thanking us because our line was backing up into their booth and they were getting traffic.
Help their business. Yeah.
Right. In 3 to 4 days, we booked $100,000 in business. Now, the problem is I had no money to buy the raw materials. I had no way to fill those orders. I had no distribution system set up. I was in trouble. But I'm also a Marine, and I believe that we improvise, we overcome, we adapt, we figure out whatever we can do to solve that mission and whatever we do. And I figured it out. Now, unfortunately, I had to refinance my house. I maxed out credit cards. I had to borrow my 401k. Then that wasn't enough. I ended up raising a couple $1 million in venture capital financing and eventually built the fire equipment products into safety products like exit signs. And by the time, we hit last year, we were close to $30 million in sales. So really, it was an incredible journey. But the very long answer to your very short question is the book is about the warrior spirit and how we can use adversity and challenges to prepare us for our crucibles and then prevail out of our crucible to become a transformation warrior. And my crucible in my business was when I was running out of money. My CFO called me up and said, Zach, we're not going to make payroll. We're going to probably have to liquidate the company. I thought I was having a heart attack. I fell down to my knees. I'm crying. My wife and son are watching me. They're freaked out. Realized it was a panic attack. That was my abyss. That was my crucible. And the change that I had to make to get to that warrior level was, number one, step down as CEO from the company I started and bring in a really good professional CEO. And number two is make some changes in the way that I operated and the changes that I had with my partners and some of the people that I work with, some of which I had to terminate, some of which I had to change around. And the book is a series of stories about people that have gone through that same journey of adversity, challenge, how they grew from it, the science of adversity. I interview everyone from the military to the CIA to FBI to the White House to different entrepreneurs and kind of share those common traits of that warrior's journey.
Yes, his book, Warrior Entrepreneur, right back here. Links in the description box. You talk about all the adversity you had to go through, and a lot of entrepreneurs will start their business and basically from scratch. And you kind of had a lot going on where you were just making this, you didn't plan on starting a big business with it, and you had all these people already wanting to buy it. And even, that seems like the dream start for a lot of companies. And even with that start, with people throwing money at you and telling you need to turn this into a business, you still went through, dealt with a lot of adversity and had to do stuff that most people wouldn't, like refinancing your house and maxing out credit cards, things that society tells us don't do that today. That's a bad idea. 99% of entrepreneurs in the same position you were wouldn't have a business today.
Well, I first of all, thank you for sharing that. Looking back, I probably would have been better having a nice slow burn and a slow build up instead of what happened to me, which is hitting it all at once. Mm-hmm. There's two here. The first one is the concept of the cash conversion cycle. The cash conversion cycle is how long does it take for you to take $1, put it into your business and get paid $2 back or $1.50 back or $3 back. So that's the time it takes for you to source your materials, the time it takes to find someone to produce them, the time it takes to produce them, the time it takes for you to bring them into inventory, the time it takes for you to sell it, distribute it, and ship it, and then the time it takes for you to get paid. Because just because you sell it, and just because I sold $100,000, I didn't have any cash. Yeah. Because I got to be able to get it from them. And some people just don't pay on time. That's part of it. I mean, look, the ultimate game as an entrepreneur is try to delay your payments as long as possible and try to collect your payments as quickly as possible. And it's just the game that everyone plays. So that was the first challenge, is having that really big high that made you have to get all that cash in, and you're constantly chasing, trying to re-inventory and take the money that you finally bring in to pay your payroll and everything else. The second one is don't ever, ever, ever mistake revenue with profit. They're very different. You can have a company that makes $1 million in revenue, but only makes $100,000 in profit. You can also have a company that makes $500,000 in revenue, but makes $250,000 in profit. Now, most people from the outside looking in will say, I want that $1 million company. Well, no, you don't. Because when you're at $1 million company, you got to hire more people. You have more expenses. You have certain things that are out there that bring into play. Once you start having 10 employees, you got to have HR. You don't need HR if you only got a couple employees. You can outsource it. You need legal issues. You have lawsuits, and all this stuff comes in there. So rather than trying to grow something so fast and so large, focus on how much profit you have and how can you reduce that cash conversion cycle as quickly as possible.
Well, and to go back to, all the adversity you went through, something we deal with a lot of small entrepreneurs, much smaller than you, much smaller companies. But a lot of things that we tell them is when you're going to deal with adversity, the only way you can get through it is, you mentioned having that warrior mentality, but also you have to love what you're doing, because it's really hard to fight through something if you truly don't love what you're doing.
So I think love is probably the most important thing that a warrior has to have. And I look back at all the traits: leadership's grit, integrity, teamwork. But at the end of the day, it comes to love. First of all, love for your country. Second of all, way more important than love for your country is love for your brother and sisters that are next to you. Love for the job that you're doing. That's what's going to make you work harder, go longer, and put that out there. Your child, raising a kid is very difficult. But you love them, and therefore you're able to do that. So you're absolutely right. I was very passionate not only about being an entrepreneur, but my mission, my why is so much more important than my what and my how. The TED Talk by Simon Sinek on what, how, and why, I think is quite possibly the greatest 5 minutes I've ever spent watching something. If you haven't seen it, go out and Google it right now. Simon Sinek, what, how, why. My why is I'm helping my brother and sister firefighters save their lives. My why is the exit signs, helping civilians find their way out of a dark building. My why is environmental sustainability, where we don't have to have electricity, batteries, light bulbs, and we can use non-electric things for our exits. So that why is that love that will keep you going, because the only way an entrepreneur can fail is to give up. There's a solution for every single challenge that you're faced with. The problem is most people don't want to work that hard or don't want to make those sacrifices. And, that's the reason 90% of businesses fail after 10 years, 50% fail after 5 years. A lot of businesses don't even make it through the first year.
Yeah, we've talked about on this podcast before. We've mentioned a saying, tough. I think I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but hardworking men make good times make weak men make tough times make hardworking men. And it's a situation where we want better for our kids. Obviously, we know there's a mixture of love and discipline, and you want them to face adversity, but I'm sure you wouldn't want your kids to go through the same situations where you're broke down crying in certain situations. But that made you who you are, because not everybody can come up from that, because like you were saying, you have a few choices, and some people are just going to break down and not be able to make it. And go ahead.
Thing called the fight and flight. You're faced with a grizzly bear. Do you stand up and fight, or do you take off running? You have a tough situation. Do you have that difficult conversation with that person, or do you avoid them? I also think there's a third component to play that a lot of people don't talk about, and that's freeze. I think you got the flight, and you've got the freeze. So to your point there, one of the things that I go through in the book is, first of all, break down the science of adversity. In your body, your brain releases chemicals and things with the neurons that synapses power back and forth with them. And they work very differently when you're faced with one of those emergency situations. So you have this thing called your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. If you're faced with an emergency, your body is going to, first of all, increase your heart rate, which helps increase your breathing, which causes more blood to flow to your brain, which causes your pupils to dilate, causes the hair on your arms to stand up. Those are all things of your body getting you ready for that fight. And when you can learn that and you can hone that, you can actually use that as a great power. The opposite also happens once that danger has gone off, and that's when you usually have that situation after a car accident, after some type of emergency where you just feel like you're going to throw up. It's your body then flooding your system to get rid of that adrenaline, flush all that out. And what I tell people, if you've ever been in a car accident, the one common thread you always hear from someone in a car accident, a real near-death experience, is how everything goes into slow motion. If you've ever been in this situation, you literally everything, and what that is your body, your chemicals in your brain are literally helping you analyze this situation that may be the end of your life and allowing it to go slow motion so you can pick up these super senses and feel that. And I don't want my kid to have to go through the stress that I did and those things. But the reality is life's a bitch, and bad things are going to happen in business and life and love and everything. And we have to be able to be ready. And when those things happen, take on that warrior position, know what's happening to your body, use that to get through that initial situation, and then recover through exercise, mindfulness, other types of things that can help you balance that out. And when you can really work that system, that's where that warrior mindset can really help you out in any place in your life.
Yeah. And going back to what you were, going through adversity, and we like to, in today's world and economy, build up business and social media and everything to make things easier, communication easier. And right now, I think we talked about on the phone, right now is the best time in history to start businesses because it's so easy. You could start businesses. You have a Facebook page. You don't even necessarily need a website, at least not right away with social media. And that can be an issue sometimes when it's so easy to get to that point to start a business, and you take what your dream is in your mind and you're able to put it down into a functioning business. And then you start having those issues come up. And people don't want to deal with them. Some people don't want to deal with them. And there's probably, I don't have the stats in front of me, but there's probably more businesses starting now every day than at any time in history, and probably
Well,
just as many failing.
I'm sure. And it's kind of the natural selection. You don't want everyone to be successful, then it's too crowded. You only want the people to rise up, and luck will only get you so far. Hard work will only get you so far. It's that combination of having the right team and the tenacity and the grit to be able to attack each one of those problems in a systematic way with a delegated team, which is something I didn't do a good job early on. I try to do everything myself. But it's extremely difficult to be an entrepreneur, which is why there's not a lot of them out there. There's a saying that if you want to live the rest of your life like most people can never imagine, you got to live the way of your current life the way most people would never would. And I'm sure I botched that quote up somehow or another. The point being is working those 100-hour weeks, giving up holidays, giving up vacations, having to be literally glued to your phone, even at dinner time, that my wife yells at me, but I'm like, honey, it's business. I don't have an off switch here. And I did that so that we could have a better life down the road. And we're starting to really see that now, having the opportunity to move down to Hilton Head and get out of Cincinnati and do those things. And a lot of that was because of the success that we've had in these last couple of years in the business. Those were those sacrifices I made in those early times when I was having a lot of stress. And honestly, I didn't pay myself the first 3 years. I had $150,000 of debt to Amex, $400,000 to the bank. Not me personally, the business did, but I personally guaranteed it. Those were all the risks that I had to have out there. So I think there's something good about cleaning it out and not making everyone succeed, because you only want that warriors to make it. The other thing I'd like to say to that point is, if you want to truly have no ceiling to the amount of income that you can make, if you want to make over $500,000, $1 million, anybody that makes over $300,000 or $400,000 is in a risky job. It just doesn't happen. Medicine, lawyers, business owners, you name it. You also have to be willing to give up the floor too. So a lawyer that doesn't bring in any revenue is going to make less money than someone working in a cubicle that's making $50,000 a year. But that lawyer also has the opportunity to get some pretty big accounts and make $500,000, $1 million in a year. So if you are comfortable with security, don't go into entrepreneurship. Have that floor that you'll never make less than that money, but you're also never going to make more than X amount of money. But if you're willing to give up that floor and that security, then you literally have the sky's the limit when you start getting into those areas.
Yeah, you're right. When you have that floor, that also creates a ceiling in the same effect that it keeps you capped in on that.
Yeah, but it gives you security. It's nice and cozy right in that middle area there.
Yeah.
But if you want that high reward, you also have to be willing to put in the high risk that goes along with it.
Yeah. And you can't be afraid to fail either. And I think that's what we preach to entrepreneurs and business owners that we work with on the daily is you can't be afraid to fail. You have to go out there. You have to have balls, and you got to be able to go out there and just and not worry about what the consequences may be. Otherwise, you're not going to try it. You're not going to push. You're not going to, someone like you that went out and mortgage, get a second mortgage on your home, somebody without balls willing to do that isn't going to go there and probably wouldn't be where you're at today.
Well, I think it's a combination of big balls and small brain, because if I knew all the risks,
that's right.
I probably would do it. My attorney, when he told me early on, and he's like, look, my job is to mitigate risks. So my advice is don't make any product, don't hire any people, don't spend any money, don't take any money in and don't sign any contracts. That way you're going to be safe. And I'm like, okay, then we'd never have entrepreneurs. He's like, right. So if lawyers ran everything, that's what would happen.
Yeah.
So you take that risk. Now, there's a difference between failure and giving up. Failure is just simply not accomplishing whatever that mission was that was in front of you. It could be a small failure or not. That's part of the learning process. That's part of the growing process. At some point in time, the caveman burned his hand enough time reaching into the fire that he realized, you know what? I'm not going to reach my hand into the fire anymore. He failed those first 3 or 4 times, but if he didn't fail, we'd never know that you burned yourself if you put your hand into that hot fire. So giving up is different. Giving up is saying, okay, I've had enough. And it's okay to quit. It's okay to give up. That I'll never fault anybody. You should really have a plan for when you want to sell the business, but also a plan for when you got to call it quits, when X amount of money's been spent. But if you want that warrior mentality, you got to continue to keep pushing out there, because you never know that fifth failure was the last step that happened before the sixth one, which was the success. And if you quit after that fourth time, you would have known it. So, that grit and constantly giving up, learning from your failures, constantly improving. When I've been sued by former employees or I had bad things, I learned something every time that happened. We got sued from one attorney because we didn't terminate him the correct way. We used the wrong word in his termination letter, and we got caught. Well, guess what? That ain't going to ever happen again. We're going to know that, got to put this exact line verbatim from the contract in here. That was a failure. It cost us a lot of money, but I learned about it from moving forward for in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. This topic actually makes me think of the story of WD-40. Have you heard that's the 40th formula that they had, that it took them 39 additional tries to get to where they're at? And this topic always makes me think about that.
Yeah, how many things would you try 40 times?
Yeah, would you try 40 different times, fail 39 times?
You might think this is just isn't
to
right
get there and be what you are now, be a household name.
And this is the reason the small business and the entrepreneur is so unbelievably important to our economy. Most large companies, a middle-level project manager is going to be responsible for that WD-40 compilation. By the fifth time that he failed, he's going to get fired.
Mm-hmm.
At middle-level management, you're only trying to not screw things up and be able to network to get up to that upper-level thing. But for a small business, and I imagine WD-40 at the time was a very, very small business, they could sit in that garage and just keep trying formulation after formulation after formulation. It's the David and Goliath thing. Goliath, big, strong, giant monster, but he was slow. He didn't move very well. He was really big. David, fast, nimble, great strategy. That's really the difference between a small business and a big, large business that doesn't have the ability to pivot and to improvise like the smaller businesses can, and allows us, like David did to Goliath, to literally run circles around them before they realize what's going on.
Yeah. And taking, we're talking about learning from mistakes and talking about botching sayings. I read it in a book, and it was basically saying average people learn from their own mistakes and greater people learn from other people's mistakes. And I think that's a great, segue. We're talking about your book. Entrepreneurs can read your book and learn from the mistakes you made and others, the stories in the book. And sometimes you don't even have to make the mistakes yourself. You can really learn about other people's risks. And that's really what it's all about, is taking risks. I mean, starting a business in general, even if you're not refinancing your house, it's a risk, even though it's a small risk at first. But the bigger risk you take, the possible bigger reward you have.
You just nailed it. Absolutely perfect. Spot on. My goal is for you not to have to go through this. I love the analogy about not wanting my kid to have to go through that. You're right. I want to say, hey, son, I learned this way. Don't do this, that, or the other. And so the book is really, the first third of the book is talking more about the science of adversity and just how it works. But then the last 2/3 of the book is just a series of very short stories, very small conversations around, maybe it's a paragraph talking about Elon Musk's battle with depression and how he was able to get through. Maybe it's 5 or 6 pages of me talking about the first ever female Marine infantryman that was born in a Siberian prison and was rescued out of a Moscow orphanage by her family in New York. And she rose on to become legendary in the Marine Corps. So that's the real goal, is like you said. And as a special gift to your listeners, what I'd like to offer is if they visit warriorentrepreneurbook.com and type in the code podcast 2021, podcast 2021, I'll offer 50% off for anybody that wants to buy the hardback, paperback, or audiobook and ebook versions. That's only for your listeners. Podcast 2021 is in the coupon code. In addition to that, please register, put in your name and number. I'd love to get in touch with you. One of the things that I'm going to start working on is some one-on-one coaching and developing a warrior framework. It's going to be a 3-month program where you get a chance to spend time with me every week, one-on-one, as we develop your warrior blueprint and plan for success. It's kind of geared towards small business owners and entrepreneurs, but it's really just for anybody that wants to kind of level up their life and embrace that warrior mindset and way of living.
Yeah. So the book launched September of this year, correct? That's
correct.
And in just a few weeks, you rose to the bestseller list on Amazon, the bestseller status.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I thought the only one that was going to buy my book was going to be my mom and my wife. Yeah, we did pretty well. We made it to #1 in entrepreneurship, small business, self-help categories, and then also in several different countries. For some reason, they love me in Norway. I don't know what I did there, but hey, I was #1 in Norway for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, you know, we actually have a pretty good following in Australia. We have quite a few. We're like, well, we did interview a guy that was launching a book from Australia, but you know, it's like we gained a big following from there just from that. It's like, well, okay, that's
they don't get talked about enough, I guess.
Yeah. What's one thing though you would tell like any entrepreneur that's out there, like just one piece of, if you could only give them one piece of advice, what's the one thing you would tell them?
My one piece of advice is in 3 parts, so I'll get around with that one piece there. Think of it as a 3-legged stool. You have to have really good answers to these 3 questions, and these are the 3 questions I ask every entrepreneur that I mentor or that I potentially invest in, or I want to bring them into my network of venture capitalist investors. #1, have you solved a problem in a unique and elegant way? #2, what is your unfair competitive business advantage? And #3 is you better have kick-ass sales, marketing, distribution. So let's break each one of those down. Have you solved a problem in a unique and elegant way? At the end of the day, entrepreneurship is about solving problems. It could be as a consultant that you can show them how they can make their business more successful or their company they have. It could be a better mousetrap. In my case, the problem that I solved was what happens when you go into the dark and you get disoriented. And my elegant solution was just simply using glow-in-the-dark pigment that I put in different materials. So that's pretty easy. Most people have a pretty good answer to #1. The second one, that's where it starts to get difficult. You have to have an unfair competitive business advantage. Not illegal, not unethical, unfair. So for example, if you're a veteran, having a veteran status may help you with an advantage on doing government contracting. If your uncle owns the local, fuel distribution place, you may have more of an advantage to sell him raw crude or something along those lines. If you've developed a certain type of coffee cup and you get an exclusive agreement with Starbucks, that's an unfair advantage. So whatever you can think of. My unfair advantage was I used fellow firefighters as my sales team. So when Honeywell and MSA and these big billion-dollar companies went out with their sales reps in their suit and ties and their nice cars, but they never were a firefighter.
Yeah.
Firefighters are a brotherhood, very similar like it is a lot of your industries down in Texas, that people know each other. They don't want some outsider coming in there talking fast and smooth to them. The third one, that's where it gets really challenging. You can have the greatest product in the world. If you don't have good marketing, sales, and distribution, no one's going to know about it. And what most entrepreneurs and inventors do, which is such a dangerous thing, is they spend so much time protecting their idea that they never get a chance to monetize it. They buy a patent, and a patent costs anywhere from a couple thousand to tens of thousands of dollars. But that's not the cost of the patent. The cost of the patent is how much it costs to litigate it, because it's going to take you 18 to 24 months to litigate a patent, and it's about $100,000 a month. And if you lose, you usually have to pay the winner's legal fees too. So unless you have like Procter & Gamble does, or one of these big companies, a whole team of patent attorneys on salary, don't even think about the patent. Spend that money on Facebook ads and target marketing. Spend that money on a really great brochure. Spend that money on going to a trade show where you can get thousands of leads within a 2 or 3 day period. Focus on how easy it is for you to sell your product, which is beautiful because now, like you said earlier, best time in the world to be an entrepreneur. You literally can just whip out your iPhone, open up an account on Amazon or eBay, start selling stuff out there today.
Yeah.
So before you start thinking about this great idea to change the world, think about how you're going to get it in the hands of people, how they're going to know about it, and how they're going to buy.
Absolutely. And that's a great spot to, again, remind everybody listening, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, maybe you're an aspiring entrepreneur, there are a lot of lessons, right? If you're watching on YouTube, obviously I'm pointing to the book. You can buy his book, and everything, the coupon code he said, all of his links, we're going to put in the description box below. And before we end this episode, is there anything else that you want to talk about, bring up, say, or get out there?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. It always means a lot to me and my fellow veterans when you say thank you for your service. But rather than thanking us for our service, do something, fly the American flag, teach your kids the importance of standing up for our national anthem. And when you see those veterans that are out there struggling, because a lot of those wounds that the veterans have are not physical, they're emotional, get them the help that they need. That's the best way you can thank our veterans, because without our veterans, we wouldn't have the opportunity to live in the greatest economy in the greatest country in the world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Very true. All right. Well, we appreciate you being on with us. Everybody go to his website right now in the description box and buy Warrior Entrepreneur.
Yeah.
By Zachary Green.
Don't forget the code he had as well for you. We'll post that below as well.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
And it's a real pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, Zach.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Thank you again for supporting the Business and Beyond podcast.
Be sure to hit the subscribe button to be alerted every time we post a new episode.